Okay, this is such an honor. I'm so blessed to have the four of us together in each other's physical presence this time to have part 2 of the family affair. And I want to kickstart really just very briefly with 2 questions. And it really isn't 2 questions, it's a statement or let's say a sentence that I'd like you each to finish. So I'll say the sentence, and if I can then just go around the room this way, and then the second time, if we can go around the room that way, that would be great. So that first sentence, starting here with you, Saida. If I could wake up in the morning and one thing be better in the world, I would want it to be...
That every person has a deep sense of self-love and respect, and that just flows outwardly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks.
I think I would say that people... I'd say that people really ought to connect deeper with their truest self, because I think that we would be more harmonious. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Can you repeat, please?
If I could wake up in the morning and one thing be better in the world, I would want it to be...
That people concentrate their focus and forces on their potential as opposed to their flows.
I love that. Beautiful. Okay, so we're coming back this way now. Second question or sentence. If I could wake up in the morning and one thing be better in me, I would want it to be...
Quite honestly, that I could do better by sleeping less.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I would like to extend on the potential. I would like to maybe connect a bit more with my own potential, actually.
Yeah, beautiful.
And for me, it would be to risk shining even more brightly. Yeah.
I love that. And so the reason that I started our conversation off with these 2 questions is because I think this is a thread that I've been percolating around a lot for myself personally and in my work. And I know that it is something that you can all relate to in your own way. And that is that inside-out approach to life. And I think that when we focus on ourselves as individuals and honor what we need to bring and gift the world, starting with ourselves, then it will make we can have an impact or make a change or ... whatever that is. So with that thread in mind, I thought it would be really fun, because we talk about so many different things, that rather to theme this conversation on, how you change the world, how about we theme it on that thread of the inside-out approach, whether that is in changing the world, whether that's in your work, whether that's in parenting, whether that's in your relationships, whether that's in sex. I don't mind where it goes. I'm open to where we end up. The thread being that inside-out approach. And so I purposefully asked the questions from the outside in, but obviously we're going to be talking from the inside out. What you need, not that one is right and one is wrong, but that inside-out approach is the thread that I'd like to use today. Are we all cool to do that?
Sounds good to me.
Yes. Okay, so let us start with, right now there's a lot going on in the world. We know this from, with the quarantine, the lockdown, COVID-19, a lot of uprisings around the world. And so racism being very, shining a light on that as well. So and this is for ourselves, but also for others, what kind of things do you think we need to be really addressing for ourselves right now in this moment, so that we can have the impact that we're wanting to see, or the changes we think need to happen in the world, whether we're the ones to make it or not? But obviously, what can we do? What can we speak to?
I want to jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Because for me right now, I think the most important skill I need to hone is actually listening. And not listening to what I want to hear, to listen to what I don't want to hear, and then to listen even more deeply to what's underneath that. and then just be with it without having to actually have an answer or have a solution.
Yeah.
But actually show that I'm here. I'm listening, I'm curious, and lean into that. So I think that's a skill set that I think for me right now is I have to keep flexing and exercising a lot.
Yeah, and I think listening and deep listening is really important. And I personally, knowing you, would say that you're already gifted in listening. So obviously you wanting to take it deeper and further is wonderful. I'm wondering, for those who may not find that this is a natural skill or one that they've developed yet, what are some of the things that they can do to get into deeper listening? That space where, as you said, it's not about trying to solve or sort, it's just holding the space.
There's 3 simple words that I use in my heart, but I also say them out loud, and it's just tell me more. Even if someone's super angry and yelling at me, I do a body gesture of leaning toward, tell me more, and that's it. Then I shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the key there is then you shut up, because especially in instances where someone might be angry and yelling at you, it isn't easy to be quiet and shut up, right? Yeah. So I think there's some really key points there. Yeah. Either of you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I think that listening is probably one of the best gifts actually you can give to a person. I would concur that listening matters right now. I think it correlates perfectly actually with my own view that, as you talked about the outer world versus inner world. And from the outer perspective, there is this, for me, a wish that we connect more with our truest self. And from the inner perspective, I'm talking about accessing my own potential. In this environment, both of those things come with disidentification with the false self or the egoic mind. So I think when it comes to listening, in this example, that I think is helpful. I think it's certainly helpful from a point of building relations, building understanding. And I just recently actually wrote 2 articles on fostering understanding, so it's timely. It's quite fresh in my mind. But actually the core for me is about the presence. The presence, the sustaining of awareness over time is what allows the expansiveness and, as you say, holding the space for listening to happen. So for me, it's really about presence. How do we cultivate that presence then is really, from my perspective, is enhancing our own observation of self. And that comes from my experience in meditative practices. But that's how I feel you can take listening from hearing to listening to deep listening.
Nice.
Awesome.
I'll jump on that because I tend to divide the concept of awareness into 2, myself and others, to eventually guide that into a 3rd space. But building the awareness of oneself as to what our normal patterns are, our conditionings are, and then being able to, or at least be willing to build the capacity to acknowledge what it is that we are made up of. And a sense that if someone knows for themselves that they are not really good at listening and listening to hear as opposed to listening to reply, then allowing themselves to be the first person that they actually listen to without responding to, I think would be a very, very beautiful place to start. Because the distinction here to me is very important, and the listening to hear and the listening to reply are 2 different things. But also even the listening to understand, because from time to time people are working very hard at listening, but they are not really trying to understand. And that to me has got very little value as far as I'm concerned. Having said that, there's another part of listening that I think is important to mention, which is discrimination. And I don't mean discrimination in a negative connotation. I mean the actual needed discrimination needed when you listen to someone. Who are they talking to? Where is it coming from? What are they cultivating? What is it supposed to build? Is it coming from a place of love? Is it coming from a place of hate? Is it coming from a place of understanding, questioning, or assumption? And to me, that comes in the practice of, say, mindfulness and meditation, when you allow yourself to learn to slow time down to the point where when somebody speaks, you somehow, within a few milliseconds, assess for yourself, and you often get it wrong, and that's called being human. You assess for yourself what you can sense they're coming from. And then you respond to that either silently or with something based on what your prerogatives are, what your positions is. Because from time to time, the best thing to do, as I was saying, was simply to listen and be silent. And from time to time, the best thing to do is actually listen and then challenge.
Yeah, I agree.
And that comes in that differentiation, what I call discrimination, between knowing whether... I mean, look, there's a lot of information being thrown at us from all over the place. And I think I'm going to use the term bullshit detector. We've got to be able to build that one skill to a certain level where you're able to just detect bullshit and bullshit peers.
Yeah.
Even and especially when it comes from yourself.
Right?
Absolutely.
So awareness starts with oneself, knowing when you're talking shit, basically. And then be able to recognize shit coming from other people. And then allowing yourself to say and stand strong in saying, okay, I am going to stand for this, or there's something for me to build here, or there's something I can walk with, or this is something that needs to stop and I need to not be part of this conversation.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Again, coming back to the bullshitting yourself, because it's then again, not just what's going on out there, but what's going on in here. So when I asked that question, obviously I threw it out for you to come from what you think right now you might need to do, and then how that can be manifested outwardly. And so obviously we all touched on Saida's point of listening, which I love. Is there something in particular that you had in mind differently to that, in that what's going on in the world, all the stuff that I mentioned at the beginning, what is something that you feel right now for you can look at, so that is then what's rippled out into the world? And it's fine if it's also deep listening, but I just thought I'd come back to the question.
So I actually feel it's presence, which I alluded to earlier. Right. Because for me, listening is nested in presence, if you're really able to do it deeply. And the presence, and with the enhanced awareness, as we've already heard, is what allows us, so I call it the soil, actually. I may have mentioned that last time we spoke. But presence is the soil. And then listening, expressing compassionately, and really just bringing some quality attitudes to the engagement is what I call the seeds. But presence is the housing for this to happen, this enhanced awareness, which then, for me, allows the expansiveness of the deep listening, compassionate expression, and bringing mindful attitudes to bear. So presence would be the key for me right now. That will allow people to step back, as you said, to step back away from the reactivity, maybe, the defensiveness, and really question is, giving us the space. All these things are floating around already in the conversation, but I don't think that can happen without presence, because then we're still in autonomous operation without the presence. And then the conditioned mind is determining how we act and respond. So without that space or distance away from that conditioned path, the way that we so often walk, then we're unable to grow properly. So I would say presence is probably needed more now than ever. I mean, it's always needed.
Of course.
It's always needed. But especially when things get really hot and testing, and people lose their sense of self and their own mind, and also it helps us to question our own idea of identity, our own concept of identity. Who do we actually think we are? Who are you? Why are you different from me? All these questions can then be asked in a more constructive way. I think presence is the soil for those conditions to thrive.
Presence is the soil for those conditions to thrive. I love that.
Yeah, so I'll add another practical thing that I find useful for myself and that I share with people I work with, which is that changes, both at societal level, but also very personal level, as far as I'm concerned and as far as I can understand, cannot be based on the feeling of guilt, because it's not sustainable and it's not healthy. So listening and hearing the various issues that may not affect us directly, and wanting to contribute to the betterment of things and of life for many people around us, to me cannot be fed by a feeling of guilt. And as such, I am tempted always to remind people of their powers, of the potential of what they've been doing good, but also not to take on the burden of somehow wanting to change the world and somehow feeling guilty for things that have happened way before their own understanding of how things were in life. So presence is important. I really agree with Calvin, because knowing where you are, where you stand, where you come from will allow you to somehow maneuver yourself through various changes that may well need to happen and may well need to take place. But at allowing ourselves to do that both with ourselves and others as compassionately as we possibly can, and knowing full well that change takes time, and that if something is changed to something else, it will bear a cost, and to be future-minded enough to also appreciate that any change is not necessarily a good thing. So jumping on from listening to being present, personally to wanting to affect the world, before you jump and you make big leaps, massive leaps in changing yourself in order to change the world, because we all know the saying, be the change you want to see in the world. Before you do that, let us acknowledge the cost that's going to be involved in that. Let us acknowledge the cost that's going to be involved in asking others to change so that they may fit our demands and our requirements as to what we think the world is supposed to become. There is, to me, a very deep aspect of listening, because that may mean that you may feel very, very strong about being right about certain things. But if you were to ask yourself the question, how much better are things going to get if you were to do this? If you were to make people feel certain type of guilt in changing their ways? That is what I'm trying to listen to, especially nowadays with changes being forced upon people, with so much guilt and being thrown at people, and so much virtue signaling. That I am slightly wary about, and I'm always mindful not to jump on too quick, to remind people to do better at this and that.
Yeah, I had a conversation earlier actually with Saida, and she was reminding me of the saying, you can only see where you are. And I thought actually we could speak to that a little bit, just to add a little bit onto what Raf is saying about, what you think is good, what you think is the world that we need to live in is not everybody, right? We have to acknowledge as the individual, yes, we know that there is good that can come of change, but yeah, what is the cost? There's also negative repercussions that can come from change. So it's not change as a blanket approach, but I want to talk to, again, coming back to self, that you can only see where you are. So talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's an old spiritual idea that your ability to perceive, you can only perceive what's actually here. And then it's a projection, and they saw that with when the Aztecs were looking out at the ocean and the Spaniards were coming, they couldn't see the boats. They couldn't identify. It wasn't in their reality. They didn't see them. They could see something else, but it wasn't a boat. And it was to their detriment, actually. But for us here, for the inner work, when I am in a state where, say, my heart is closed, and I make the assumption that people are a-holes, I'm going to see that everywhere I look. And I will not recognize kindness or love because I'm not open. I can't see it. So then the inner work for me has always been, if I'm starting to see the world that way, I actually need to go in. I can't be going, you need to change and you need to change and you have to be less like this so that I can feel good. I go in, I'm like, wait a second, is that really true? Is what I'm seeing accurate? And so the inner work, I think, for me is the most important thing for social change, because when we can actually work on our wounds and we're not leading with the wounds, I'm not leading with everyone's horrible because they hurt me, but I'm actually open, then I actually start to see magic. Then I'm meeting individuals on individual cases with my heart that's curious and it's open. And then I'm building something fresh and new outside of ideals or constructs. And that's the magical essence of the inner work, when you finally heal and your heart starts to open a little bit and you get curious. And for me, that's been remarkable. And maybe because I've traveled so much and I've been in all kinds of cultures and I grew up as a minority and quite abused in that setting, maybe I learned to do that at a young age. So maybe it's a skill set I have a little more accessible for myself than when we grew up in a very same thing every day, same people. But the inner work is the same. So I often will ask my students when I'm teaching, because they tell me, oh, all men are horrible, all men are toxic. I'm like, are you sure about that? Or is it your own relationship with your own masculine that's toxic? And maybe you should have a look there. And as their relationship with their own masculine actually becomes more benevolent, suddenly they're like, actually, there's some great guys out there.
Right? Yeah.
So that's where that
They are.
comes from. Yeah.
Of course.
Some wonderful ones right here.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Jump in, fellas.
Can I just extend on
please.
the first thing you said about the Aztecs? And I really like that. We referred to, I believe it's called paradigm blindness.
Yeah.
And that description of not being able to see beyond your own experience blinds you to the other potential realities. So there's one really good thing. And then, you said, tell me more, or asking these further questions. One of the questions I always ask my clients is, I always say, is that true? That's it. They'll make an assertion. I had a client call last week and it was an absolute strong assertion that this is the case. Is that true? It's a good question to ask for me, because then it really helps us to explore, well, what makes me so sure that that's actually true? If there is a readiness there in the person. And if the readiness is there in the person, then, as you say, it requires a turning of the attention inward. And turning of the attention inward allows us to explore that. So from the first point of view, then, is like, are you ready or willing to turn your attention inward? We've heard that society is a mirror and is really reflecting, like you say, if you believe that all men are bad, you can only see bad men, right? I had some person attending one of my workshops last year, and it was like, the world was absolutely terrible. And I must admit that I was having the time of my life. So were we existing in different worlds? Or is it just that our perspectives are coming from inside and reflecting back? So there is that question of, is that really true? And then maybe we can then branch out or extend beyond the paradigm itself. Understanding, of course, that the belief system or the perspective that we're taking, one, is limited by our experience, two, can be compounded by our storytelling mind, the egoic mind working on you and saying, this is the reality. And then if that is a understanding that we begin with, then we're able to explore it with a bit more freedom.
Yes.
And we're not as constrained by the belief system. So the Aztecs will be able to say, I see this thing on the horizon. It is so far out of my reality, but what is that? Is it really true? Can I really write that off as a cloud or whatever? What's really coming there? What is it that I'm projecting out to there that's determined that I accept that this is currently true? So yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that idea of being able to understand that we are inside a box and we see the walls from inside. What does outside the box look like? Is it even a box?
Yeah, and is that really true that question opens up to the possibility of then not all of my thoughts are true.
Yes.
You know, and that's an interesting one. I working with clients, it's one of the I wouldn't say the biggest things, but one of the key breakthroughs when people go, but hang on, if that isn't truth, then
What is?
all of this stuff that I thought was, there is a ripple and a breakthrough through that one question that can, once you, as you said, the willingness to open up and explore the answer, then I think that ripple out can be really extraordinary when you start to question a lot. But also what it does is it helps you to secure what is for you, which is also an equally important. And I say for you because what is true for you in this moment is not necessarily true for other. So again, that's a very interesting exploration for sure. Yeah.
I don't have much to expand on that because I'll take it somewhere else. So,
Yeah, please do. Go on, take it somewhere else.
Well, we mentioned this last time that at least I think we were in agreement that we all here understand that we are the sum of the stories we tell about ourselves. And the point that I think I'm trying to make is that if we go too fast at changing the narrative, you end up not really knowing the story at all, and you end up not really understanding yourself to the point where you can really make effective and practical changes that are going to be beneficial to you and the world around you. So whether it's being aware of your own biases and where you lean, the areas that you lean onto, that you lean away from, I do think that I think the term I'm looking for is recognition. That those things that we want to change have been, to an extent, very positively useful. So I am here heading towards changing the term change to transformation.
Nice.
Because transformation, I feel, has got something a bit more lasting to it. But it's got something that is a bit more, I don't know, rooted and grounded in who you are truly, who you truly are as a person from the get-go. And I'm talking about from the unconscious aspect, like becoming conscious of your own biases, which are very much part of your personality and your being. Helps me, helps you, helps us becoming more of who we are. Now trying our best then to capitalize on those biases in order to serve both yourself and others, I think is where it's at. And it doesn't mean change those biases. Just appreciate that they're there first and foremost. Coming back to the term awareness, coming back to this concept of presence. Be present with your own biases, with your own preferences, with your own lack of knowledge, with your own ignorance, but also with your knowledge of what could very much be the truth. And then aiming for better. And let that lead the way towards a transformation that can be really, really useful, not only to you only, but to others as well. And I think a real positive transformation always shows up in the useful for me and others. I'm not going to say everyone.
No.
But at least, and it can be in the other, for others and into me. But it's got to me that connotation of positive, and I'm not a fan of positive talk, so it's like, I find so many positive things in negativity, but so there's this whole thing of be positive for the sake of it. It's not what I'm referring to, but positive as in workable, useful to go forward in time in life and to move on from whatever we're stuck in. That is what I call positive. Because if once you have that awareness, the positive thing could be also to say, I am moving from where I am because other thing is actually just fine. And that to me would be just useful as well.
Yeah, I mean, I personally love the word transform. I mean, it's, in terms of coaching, that's what I call myself. And I think, kind of touching on what you said, it's a way having respect for the past, having respect for the past experience, so that it's not I'm changing, so I'm not that, and now I'm this. It's that's part of the journey, that's part of the process and the progress from where I was to where I am, and even if it's just tomorrow to where I'm in a year or two. So I really resonate with that. Using the word transform instead of change is an interesting one. But I do want to ask you something, and you can all touch on this, but because you brought it up and you mentioned the pace, sometimes people may go through those changes too quickly. I'm curious, or too fast, what determines the pace?
The outcome and how much of how big a cost it was the change had.
Okay. So the outcome, not the process?
Well, the pace is the process. So processes to me are in relation to, from the context of what we're talking about right now, is getting to a better place, whatever that means for you. That is the process. But you've asked about the pace of that.
Yeah, so I mean, when you say that people sometimes, if the change is too fast, that sometimes that's not what's needed. Sometimes it is. We know certain things take longer. So when I say what determines the pace, I want to know if you think that I'm saying to Saida, Saida, I really feel like I want to, be able to be a black belt in martial arts. And that's the outcome I would like. And I've never done martial arts before, so this is where I am now. Do I have a say in the pace in which I move, or is it just based on the outcome? Because you say it's the outcome, not the process.
Then it comes down to the definition of your outcome and your understanding of what is it that you're really truly asking for. Because the pacing then will be dictated by your growing understanding of the goal that you're working towards. There are martial arts out there you can get a black belt in 6 months, and there are martial arts out there you cannot get a black belt before 10 years. Then how aware and knowledgeable of yourself you are, or your own standards, your own qualities, what type of depth are you interested in, the quality that you're working towards, the depth of engagement and the depth of inquiry, the meaningful behind the process itself, the meaning beyond the process itself. And when you talk about getting a black belt, you're not talking about a process, you're talking about a goal and a destination.
Yeah, so in that instance, then the pace somewhat is determined by internal and external factors. Obviously, they're vast, because we're talking about, as you said, how determined you are, the standards you have, what you want. You might decide, actually, I don't care if I happen to do that in a year or 10 years or 20. I just know that it's the process. But sometimes you think, oh no, I really want to make sure that I'm a black belt by, or whatever. So determined by that internal value, that internal desire and design, and also the external factors of, you just can't get a black belt in that until you've done this.
Yes.
Because that's just what it is, where you don't have a choice in that. You have to decide to go through the work, do the work.
So in a single word, what determines the pacing is your understanding of your own ignorance.
In Indonesia, there was a high priest, and he taught me something called the law of time. And he said, you cannot pull on a seedling and it be an oak tree overnight. It has its own timing. And ever since he planted that little seed in my head, when I want something now, oh, why is it not now? It's taking so long. It's 5 million times slower than I want it to be. I remember the law of time. I'm like, oh, and then I just relax. And there's something very important about that. So some of us want change now. We're sick of how things are.
Yeah.
But when we say that, as you were saying, Ralph, we don't understand what that actually implicates. If we want suddenly that the world has 0 carbon emissions, what, we're all just going to walk everywhere? Is it, we just get rid of all the vehicles? We no longer have this and that and that and this? I mean, there's so much that the individual has to take on for the change to happen that quickly.
Yeah.
And most of us would not be willing to let go of the kind of lifestyle that we have to have this thing. And that's why I think having elders or having people who help to pace society with some wisdom in a yes and conversation. Yes, I hear you. Yes, it's valid. And we need to consider Mm-hmm. And continuing to lean into those yes and conversations so that we can, as you were saying, have transformation. To me, I love that word because formation, we are formed one way. Trans means to go beyond. So that means we have to constantly go beyond the rigid formation of our minds and how we hold our bodies and how we respond. So if we're really looking for transformation, then it's moment by moment and also dissolving rigidity within our own selves. So that's a practice that currently very few people have access to, I believe. That practice of softening, of trusting, of allowing. These are not words you hear. And I think we need those if we actually want to transform even more rapidly. Yeah.
Yes. Ditto. So actually, I'm like listening and digesting, and I'm thinking what's coming to my mind is the personal desire and how the personal desire is differentiated from universal intelligence, divine timing, the law of nature, however you want to describe it. But as you mentioned, there is what you want and then there is time. That idea is actually what it's saying to me is there is something else governing the transformation process beyond your own personal desire. And there is a surrendering to that. So in this ancient wisdom, where did you say it was from? Indonesian.
Yeah.
It's an ancient Indonesian wisdom which says there is time. You can't. There is something that is out with your control, basically. And it doesn't matter how much you want it. The person who suffers is only you. You can't force things to happen. So there is an element then of letting go. And I think that letting go, that surrender, is probably pertinent here. So as we now are working with ourselves in this climate and we want to see the change, we work and then we let go. We work and then we let go. And there will be, I would guess, some retrospective rear view mirror feedback which lets us know, hang on, that was too fast or not too fast. Okay, maybe I need to. And then that Kaizen, continuous improvement, happens. Constantly adjusting course, I need to go a little bit more left, a little bit more right, a little bit more forward, a little bit more back. That happens in the gap between action and surrender, in the gap between planting the seeds and surrendering to time. So I think, yes, I can see the two marrying, and they can't be separated from each other. They're, they work together. So that's one of the things. So actually, interestingly, the idea of letting go, to me, into the time, into the nature, into that greater power, requires a degree of selflessness, which we then have to go back to that first question: is who actually are we? Who are you in the first place? What does selfless actually even mean? What does that word even mean? So it means that first there is an idea of self, and that idea of self needs to become less in order to surrender to something out with our control, which in itself is quite a big thing to comprehend on a philosophical or intellectual level. But when you really simplify it down to presence, then you can see in present moment, micro moments, then you experience tiny experience of selflessness. And that's transcendent in my mind.
I love that. Whew. This is awesome. Feeling this really, really lovely. You know, there is something, and I know you'll relate to this, Calvin. Obviously, we grew up with the same parents. But thinking about, you know, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned, certainly growing up, and I again, just touching on this because we're again coming from that inside out approach, is knowing when it's your shit, knowing when to take responsibility for your stuff, right? And equally knowing when it isn't yours. So since we're still on this theme and thread of the inside out approach, I'd be curious to talk to that, because I personally feel that this attitude, I will call it, has saved me heartache. It has given me a chance to overcome the emotional ups and downs that, you know, experiences present, and so on and so forth. But it implies, if you're taking responsibility for something that is yours, that you know it's yours in the first place, that you know to look inwardly to find something. And then the blaming and the outer, this is you, your fault, you changes because you know what's yours and equally what's not. So, I mean, obviously hubby's next to me now. Very often I might come to him with nonsense, as people do, and he will say, Sim, I hear you, but that's not me. That's nothing to do with me. Take your time, work it out. And if you need someone to listen, I'm here, but that's your stuff. Go work it out. And vice versa, because we know when it's ours. Or I would actually just come and say, this is my stuff, but I need to express it. So the point I'm making in all of that, not necessarily just in relationship, but certainly in interaction in general, talked about a little bit how to take responsibility for your own stuff, and equally when it ain't yours, don't touch it. Leave it over there.
I think there's a few components to that. Responsibility, ability to respond. Very few of us have that. We react. We have reactability. Part of that reactability comes from having a system that's permanently on high alert. Something bad's going to happen. And so we have the amygdala that's firing. We have the stress response in the body. It's absolutely impossible for an under-resourced person to be resourceful, to think creatively, to even feel, to even see. You can't. What happens when we're in a stress response? Vision narrows, everything, the blood flows away from digestion and even your frontal lobe. So you can no longer think in a creative way. All you want to do is fight or flight or freeze, and now you're completely incapable of handling what's in front of you. That is the state that most people live in and day out. And so part of what we need to do before we even start talking and exploring ideas and philosophies is first just regulating the human body. If we could just get human bodies more regulated, taking some deeper breaths, just teaching people how to breathe. It sounds ridiculous because we all breathe without thinking. But when we think about breathing, we can actually modulate that nervous system. And then we need to learn how to actually identify when we're in that alert, stressed, and when we're actually able to take some deep breaths and go, okay, I am feeling stressed about this, but I've breathed enough to relax and to hear and to get creative, or to own and to explore in myself, or to ask questions outwardly. So I think that's the first mechanism. I always love body first, mind second, because the mind just does this, and if the system is in high alert, it doesn't matter what's going on here. But you can use consciousness to then choose to regulate the body. And then this is a teachable skill. And little kids now are learning this in school. They're learning how to meditate. They're learning how to regulate their breath, especially now. It's been very scary. So in some areas, they're really seeing a big difference when a child knows how to just breathe and self-regulate. So that's where I wanted to start the conversation.
Just really quickly on that, the kind of going into the fight or flight. What if in front of you have someone, you're having a conversation, you and I are having a conversation, and it's very harmonious in fact, we're just communicating, it's wonderful. But what I'm putting down isn't yours. You're not in fight or flight. You're not in freeze. You're not in, I need to get in my body. You're just calmly taking in what I'm saying.
Yeah.
what is the frame on that, knowing when it's yours and then knowing when it's mine?
Right. I don't think you can make that separation if you don't have a stronger sense of self. So if you haven't spent some time, I call it marinating in your own essence, where you're just, you get to know, as Raf was saying, your biases. You get to know, are you in presence or are you not? If you don't even know what that is, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
It's a really good place to start. Just start there.
Yeah.
And then what happens very quickly, because we're very instinctual and intuitive beings, you come in contact with someone else, your whole body is reading the other person instantly. You're getting way more prelingually than you are in the language. And then you can learn very quickly, because I used to do this, I'd get headaches and stomach aches, and then I'd turn to the person, I'm like, are you okay? They're like, no, I have a headache and a stomach ache. I'm like, oh, it's not mine. And then it would just disappear. Right. So learn to seek relations like ours is great, because I can come to you with something, and then there's this clear mirroring. We have mirror neurons, and we're always mirroring things. But if we lie to each other intentionally, it destroys this very sensitive system that allows us to trust that we're feeling something and something's off. And then we can say, okay, something's off, Simone. I'm not sure what you shared. It's maybe all your stuff, but it's actually, there's something going on for me too now. That's very advanced emotional behavior. So I think in the beginning, just simply sitting with, I'm insecure, I get jealous easily. If someone picks their nose in front of me, I fly into a huge rage. And then you have these things, and then when someone starts doing this, you're like, oh, it's happening. And you're like, okay. But you can own that it's your thing.
Yes.
Right?
And breathe.
But first, really, it does ask us to not be afraid, to put the devices down, to say goodbye to personal interaction for a moment. Sit in nature, sit alone, go for a walk, and just be in your own relationship with yourself. Ask yourself, what do I love? What are my biases? What are the things that trigger me? And get to understand that. Because without that first, there's no way the second you're angry, I'm going to think, oh, everything's wrong with me, and then I'm going to take it personal, and it's a mess. So
yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
As you're saying that, it's funny because my not only my understanding of the question or the point that you made about it, but also the example that you gave automatically didn't put me in the let me just check myself. It was in relation to when someone comes to me and I'm the recipient. It's something that I've been, in most of my life, been commented on for being able to just be fairly stoic even before I knew the meaning of stoicism, even when I was younger. And I don't know where I get that from exactly. I have an idea, but anyhow, I'm babbling here, but all of that to say, I think this. I teach this to teachers, and to me it comes down to one particular skill. That's what I just broke it down as far as I'm concerned. What you said about my ability to just, you come to me with some nonsense as people do, and me just to sit there and just put it, and sometimes just throw it back in your face and just put it just as it is. My ability to do that comes with one thing and one skill that I'm doing my best to coach others to develop, is that I do not mind being disliked. And I think that a lot of us are way too wary about being disliked, and I think this convention aspect, this thing, I do not want to be misunderstood, I do not want to be disliked, I don't want to be talked about negatively, and all of that is proper BS. And as soon as one appreciate the value that comes with not caring whether or not you're liked or disliked, then there's certain truth with a capital T that just start to appear. And then if you are in presence and if you are fully self-aware, you can really and truly just say it as it is, because yes, the person will dislike you for that period of time. However, you will be able to stand strong in what you are trying to cultivate in your life and where you're trying to get to. Because as I mentioned early on, where's this person coming from? What amount of self-awareness has been thrown at me right now? What lack of self-awareness has been? What am I being blamed for?
Yep.
As I mentioned earlier on, this whole thing of guilt, just like recognize when someone is trying to make you feel guilty about something that you got fuck all to do with. And be very clear about that. And I always suggest to people, just be very direct about it at that specific period of time. And then once you've been direct, put it this way. When you're ready to talk, if you want to bounce a couple of ideas off, as in be practical, then come back to me. But as I said, it comes down to me, as far as I'm concerned, to that one skill. Develop the capacity to be disliked. It doesn't last. That's the secret.
Yeah, and so just to touch on the other side of that, because I think I know you and I love that. What happens when it's your stuff? How do you work on that? When it's not about throwing it in someone else's face, but facing it yourself?
Give me an example.
I don't know. You have an interaction with someone and you say something. It might be in the moment or in reflection that you notice that was not about that person in front of me. That was my stuff. I need to sit with that. I need to whatever with that. I just wonder, what's your practice with inward looking for your own stuff? Because we all have interactions, whether it is as a teacher with your students or me or your friends or the world in whatever way, and we react sometimes, you're using the word react, to something, and it's not about the external, it's about the internal. So I'm just flipping what you said just now. How do you throw it in your own face, for the lack of better words? You throw it in someone else's face and reflect back to them what is needed. How do you do that for yourself?
Oh, well, I mean, practically speaking,
Yeah.
Second skill I guess I've developed over the years is that I like being in that space personally, where I am teaching, and whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever my body's going through, is something that I am going through, as opposed to whatever else might be going on. I personally like this. Not to blow my own trumpet, it doesn't happen often, and it's the reason why. I like it a lot. You know, when I'm on my toes and I'm like, oh, things are moving at a pace that I'm not accustomed to, or I'm not really vibing to right now.
Yeah.
Because then you talked about, and you've asked me about process and what dictates the pace of things, of certain processes, is then how much time do I need in order to self-regulate? So this is how I throw it back at my face, to go, okay, this is your own bullshit right now. Let's see how much time, and I don't rush it, how much time you can come out of that. With experience, you'll know and understand also that from time to time, you were not wrong in the first place. And from time to time, but that's next level of things we can talk about as well, meaning that I can self-regulate, but I also trust my instincts. So self-regulating, this is my own stuff, nothing to do with people, but my spidey senses have been spiked for a reason. So I'm still aware of that. If it's something that I'm throwing in somebody's energy, it is because I believe I received it from somewhere.
Yeah.
It might be my mistake to think it's that person that's in front of me as opposed to the person who's giving me my coffee 5 minutes ago. But
And I think that trusting instincts is key with that inward looking. It's what you said. It is coming back to body. It is coming back to that, so that when something is off, you know, right? Something is off, you sense it. You didn't say, you know, I just have this parameter right here that I look in my book and I flip through it and I know, take right. No, it's this sense, this inner awareness, which again keeps coming back to that self-awareness and that breath and the body, which I love. But do jump in on that one.
let me just add something, and I'm going to throw that at Calvin just to perhaps throw him curveball. I believe that with that comes the need for a certain comfort with being pretentious from time to time. You know, by speaking up and by saying, I think I'm right. And by saying, this, what you're throwing at me is not okay. And I'm going to be confident enough, but perhaps not pretentious, but confident enough in saying no. And that is another one of those skills to me that we have to build. And I'm saying that to say that as much as I love that people are wary about not being liked, I often see people who I wish were more pretentious and more confident. And that's the reason why my first answer to your first question was in relation to potential as opposed to flows. So I don't know how you feel about that in terms of, you know what, I'd rather you make too many mistakes in telling people to F off than make too many mistakes of letting people in, if that makes sense.
before you answer, I call it healthy arrogance.
There you go.
Yeah.
So do I.
So I take the point and I agree about the objectivity and not letting the fight or flight response hijack how we respond. I think there is an element of, because the question was, how do we know what crap is ours versus the other person? I think there is an element of reflection and additional space needed a lot of the time, because it takes two to tango. You can't have one without the other. And so let's imagine a scenario where somebody comes to me with their crap. How do I feel when they come to me with their crap is going to be my first test. If I feel spacious and neutral personally, then I can be more objective, and I recognize that there's probably a bit of presence there. But more often than not, you both have crap that you have to own in that exchange, even if one person is the major owner and you're the minor owner. And the reason for that is because more often than not, somebody will get defensive. If somebody comes at me, throws some stuff at me, there's a potential for me to become defensive. That's the first thing. Even if it is mostly theirs, this is not really the point here. Because I've got defensive, that means I own some of it automatically. The second thing is that, am I being hijacked right now? How do I know if I am or if I'm not? So this is where the secondary spaciousness, I think, comes into play. Because if I were to just throw it straight back immediately, then I've made an assumption that I am right and I might not be. So it depends on what degree of spaciousness exists for me to be able to sense check that against myself, to know that's actually all you, to be honest, but I feel pretty open and relaxed about this. I'm at ease. Versus I'm returning a serve at 100 miles an hour. So there's a test there that comes. So often I would actually not respond at all, even if I do believe in that moment that the stuff belongs to you, because I may not be 100% certain. I may have had a secondary hijacking, which is not quite fight or flight, but it might be like, but you still got something here, mate. Why you want to respond in this way? And so often there's a payoff that we get inside in our responses as well, which is a drug for us. And so that objectivity needs an additional level of spaciousness. So actually I find often sometimes say nothing at all until I'm able to reflect in that presence.
Yeah.
And then when I get into the presence, I can be even extra objective. So it's 3 steps for me. Is first objectivity with a self-regulation. Then the second one is spaciousness. So actually, is it really this? Is the space really there? And then I can respond with a third degree of objectivity because I've added that buffer. I think with the cultivation of presence, that becomes easier. And sometimes you can respond straight away intuitively, as you mentioned, instinct. You can respond intuitively with the right response. But that's not a thinking response. That is an intuitive response. And at other times there is a degree of reflection. So what was your question again about what I felt?
About being having the confidence and sometimes even seeming arrogant in responding to people.
Constructive arrogance or helpful arrogance. Or
Healthy
arrogance. Yeah. I actually think that's a helpful way to look at it. I would actually determine it as neutral, not caring to be liked or disliked. Because desiring to be disliked can inadvertently make me harsher than I need to be. So I would prefer to be neutral. That's just my personal preference, and everyone's style is different. But I would prefer to be in the middle. And then, actually, I don't care if you like me. I don't care if you don't like me. I'm just going to tell you what I accept as true right now in the spaciousness that I come from. But I do see the necessity for highlighting for people that actually in a culture where we're so obsessed with self-image that we do want to be liked, and therefore the pendulum swings the opposite way, where we tend to be particularly harsh. And that might be what a person needs, but only intuition will tell me that,
Yeah.
not like my default position. And that would be how I would respond.
Yeah, and I think we don't just want to be liked. Everyone wants to virtue signal right now. And it's very aggravating because you can't have real conversations when everyone's virtue signaling. So I think underneath all this, Simone, and I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, please.
All of us, but I'd love to hear you, is I don't feel like we give the skill set to young people to really understand, well, what would you love out of relationship? And what are the gifts that you bring to relating? We never contemplate that. So, you know, what do we want? So if I'm relating with any of you, what's my goal? What's my purpose here? Is it connection? Is it discovery? Or is it just to be right all the time or to be like fluffed up, whatever it is? So that's what I'd love to just take the conversation. We don't really have that. I can't see that much in our society. Maybe your family had it, but just really teaching young people that what they're bringing into relating and how they bring it is something worthy of contemplating.
Yeah, I think I love that question. I think it's interesting. Young people, as a generalization, let's say, again, starting this off, I said that, you know, we grew up within a family where our parents from young, I would say, taught us that inward looking piece, which for me, I definitely am very mindful and conscious of with our kids. You know, if they have something that they're going through or whatever, I do get them to look inward as much as outward and to know when it's not theirs. We've had quite a few conversations about this regarding one of ours in school, and how the school and the teachers and people related to him being, I would even say they would call it arrogant, which for them was rude, because a child should not say or speak in the manner in which they felt he was speaking, which was, I hold strong in what I'm doing, and this is not my responsibility. And I'm following the rules. You cannot hold me accountable to something that is not mine. And he hasn't used those words, I'm saying this. So I think the teaching of the youth is going to come from families first, because, you know, and then obviously then that branch, it's home, and then that branches out into communities and ripples out into wider society. But I think as a mother and as a parent, it starts with doing your best to lead by example and instill the confidence in your child to get it wrong and search for the answers within that wrongness, because, you know, failing and mistakes, I speak about this all the time, you know, it's just feedback. And that's all you're looking for at that stage. But if you're not even self-aware that there is something to look at, then it's just happenings, which I think a lot of, again, it's just a generalization, a lot of youth in society right now stay on the surface unless they're pushed deeper. So I think that probing and that suggestion of something deeper comes from us, of our generation. To lead, because there is, you know, it's like what we get from our parents is very different from what we're giving and what they need right now.
Because we're not modeling anything healthy. I mean, by we, I mean the thing that affects how society is reacting right now. So the leadership that we currently have isn't modeling taking a breath and being present and having healthy arrogance. There's not a moment where someone with true authority on a matter can say something, though. They just get shut down because they're saying something against the agenda of whatever. So I agree. We do need some healthy modeling, and because there isn't any, then what?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it's up to individual adults to start realizing, oh, whoa, I'm the model.
Yes.
And what am I modeling in my choices and behaviors and interactions?
Yeah, and you speak a lot about that limbic resonance in your work. So it's not what I say that's going to really impact. It's who I am and what I am, that's what they're going to pick up. And so, again, it comes back to that inside-out approach, which is what the whole thread and theme of this is. Yeah. You guys want to touch on that?
Nothing to add to that. I think it's pretty complete.
Oh, you too. Okay, cool. Looks like anything you want to add? Right. This is awesome. I'm loving this. Okay, so just coming back to story, because we spoke about that briefly. The story that we tell ourselves, and then the story that we tell others. And you mentioned, Raf, about that not taking everything away out of the story. It's not like you're trying to create a blank slate, because that is not always constructive, right? You have to, you don't break everything down and pull it away in one go. It's brick by brick, both directions, let's say. Right now, the way the world is, and the way we are, obviously individually, but globally seeing the world, let's say, what do you think is the story that we need to be telling ourselves, so that is more of what the world starts to hear, listen, deep listen to?
You want me to be frank and direct?
As always.
I don't think it's a good question.
All right.
And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because my answer to this, and that's the reason why I read it, and I may be wrong, but this is my take on it as a full example of what we discussed early on. It is not about changing or telling people what story they should tell. That to me is...
But that's not what I said, not telling people what to tell, what you need to tell yourself. So this is what is rippled out.
Same thing.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you what story you should tell yourself in order to somehow benefit you, yourself, me, or whatever. What I want to do is to help you improve the narrative of your story by helping you growing and expanding your vocabulary about your own life. That is not the same thing.
It's not, but that's not what I'm saying. You're saying what you're going to tell you, but I'm saying what are you going to tell yourself? You, Raf, to you, Raf, not what you're going to tell me. So it's not an external thing I'm asking. I'm asking about your inner story right now. What is the story you need to tell yourself, so that is the frequency and the resonance, that is what is rippled out. Not for you to then go and say to others, this is the story that you need to tell or have or agree or anything. It's that inward dialogue I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, and the inner dialogue is not inner dialogue, is an inner process, and the process is about expansion and growth. It is not about change. It is about transformation, and that doesn't come with changing the story. It comes with our approach to the storytelling aspect.
Okay, tell me about your approach to storytelling.
Expanding of the narrative, growth of the vocabulary that we use, appreciating the past and its importance on the future. Not changing the story. But changing our relationship to it.
Okay, so what story you need to tell yourself? Did that feel
like... But you're
like
asking me the same question again.
No, what I'm asking you, what story you need to tell yourself sounds to you like what change do you need to make to the story? Does it sound the same to you? If I say, what story do you need to tell yourself right now in order to sit in that resonance and reflect and ripple that out into the world, does it feel for you that I'm saying, what do you need to change your story to?
It depends on what story I'm telling myself and what I think I should be telling myself.
Right, okay.
I actually, how I feel about this as somebody who actually helps people tell stories for
a living, yeah.
Is I feel that it is helpful to sometimes step out of the story. My view is that we are in storytelling mode. Most of our conscious, egoic, maybe conscious is not the right word, but most of our intellectual mind is in story mode anyway, all the time. Often we don't know what story we're telling. So in my mind, if I were to map it out, I would say that there is a programming that we already have, and that programming is a narrative that's already running. Then there is a reprogramming, which could potentially be changing that story or not, depending on what story you're telling. And then there is a relinquishing of the programming completely. I personally feel that the ultimate place to arrive at is going beyond the story. That's my view. And I feel that comes with a presence, and that comes with a dissociation with the narrative completely. That doesn't happen continuously for the average person, including me, because I'm conditioned. I'm born into the world, I was born in the Caribbean, I speak a certain language, I wear a certain way of working, blah, 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 blah. So there's a programming that already exists. So So then there becomes an unconscious story that's running and a conscious one, which is why I go back to the original question when you ask me, what do I think I need to change about myself as opposed to changing the world? If you want to draw a loop between the two, then I would say it is about discovering the true self. And I believe that goes beyond the storytelling mind, beyond the egoic mind. And that's what I would like to reaffirm in myself. Whether you describe that as a story, a narrative, or relinquishing a story,
or message, or whatever,
or however we package the words, I think there is a way for us to bypass the story, and then we can use stories constructively in communication. Then stories then become a way to express ideas and things as we intuit them, as opposed to having to make up something, if I can describe it that way.
Which I think we do a lot. I think we do make up a lot. Yeah.
I want to kind of do both ends.
Yes, please. And I'm going to come back over to Rob.
Yeah, and I like. I always like going back to the nervous system because there's a strong story about everything. And now, we've discovered that we're completely plastic, so we can rewrite this story consistently. And the rewriting of it is intriguing because you can't rewrite something if you don't acknowledge it. So I always like this idea of the past, or called passivity because it's heavy. So that's where the wisdom is held. The past is where we go for the gems. We have to examine what happened, where are the gems, and then the rest just kind of dissolves. But the gems remain, and that's wisdom. And we want to be gaining wisdom. We don't want to forget. That's part of life, it's part of the journey. But simultaneous to that past is this possibility that is emerging. And so I'm less interested often in my story than I am in how am I choosing to meet that which is arising right now. And part of my work is to be able to be plastic enough to meet possibility, perhaps from a slightly different posture or slightly different viewpoint, and just see what comes of that. And I think there's a very strong creative element that we're not touching on within these stories that is essential to the human nature. It really is. So.
And I think that a lot of people think about meditation that, I sit and I meditate for 20 minutes and my mind is silent, I hear nothing. And, that's often the myth that comes up, that your mind is clear of thought, there's nothing going on. But even in that silence, even in that release, there is consciousness, there is still dialogue. Even if it's a mantra that you're saying to yourself, there's still something running in the background. And I think it's what we pay attention to, as you say, it's really important, because this is how then we can make conscious choices on, hey, this is how I've been living this and viewing this and perceiving this, because I keep running this thing in my mind or in my body or in my nervous system. And as you say, holding space and being open to what is that potential and what's rising over here, there is that self-awareness piece that again needs to be in place. Because when you kind of work some of that out, then you're in a space where you're resonating is then, whether it's the youth, the neighbor, the dog, whoever's in that environment that you are. And I work a lot in the space of energy and sound and frequency, that I know that frequency and resonance that you are and where you are right now is what is going to be felt. Not necessarily verbally, but that is what's going to be
absolutely
emanating. Yeah. So it's just coming back over to you, because I wanted to know if everyone was feeling about that I was saying, what do you need to change? Because it's not where I felt I was. So I want to kind of come back to, the things that we say to ourselves and taking what you were saying a little bit further.
While trying to be concise about what I was saying and taking it further, what I'm implying is that I think that the story might not be as important as how you tell it. So the construction and the reconstructions of the story is where it's at to me. It is not about the
story
deleting, it's not about the story itself to an extent. And that is why, what story would I tell myself? No, positive psychology has got some benefit, but tell yourself you're the greatest 50 times a day. what does work, we all know stories of people who've succeeded in their lives, and they're shouting stories of themselves learning affirmations and all those things. So we know, but really and truly, this hints is hinting at what Saida was referring to, the neuroplasticity aspect, and how you can rewire yourself to believe other things, so that your physicality starts to actually believe your mind and your thoughts. And it is about positive and up. It's about turning your thoughts to be more positive than they used to be. But in terms of changing the story, no. Improve the narrative by expanding your vocabulary.
Yeah, I agree. I personally wouldn't want to change my story. I would want to see it evolve.
Yes.
But it takes a knowing,
And it takes courage.
100%.
It takes courage. The little work that I do with people, and I see a lot of beautiful human beings wanting to grow and to reach heights, and I cannot help but put a label on it from time to time, of fixed mindset, even when they don't really want it to be, where you're fixed on an idea as to what you're capable of, and when you're fixed on an idea as to what your potential is, and you're fixed on the idea that this is over for you. It takes courage to, one, be aware of something and then act upon that awareness. Awareness is stage one, as we talked about earlier on. And then what? That bridge right there, called sati in Buddhist terms. Knowing what needs to be done, and then that bridge between the action in relation to your knowledge of what needs to be done, are two different things. You're in this relationship that you need to leave, whether it's the job or an intimate relationship. That gap between knowing and acting upon that knowledge.
Yes.
Takes courage, it takes guts, it takes a few things. And if we can empower each other in doing so, I think that's where it's at. Yes, being fully aware of the cost involved. It means you are now going to have to reinvent yourself. It means that you're going to have to improve on the narrative of your own story. It means you're going to have to learn a few new words for yourself.
Language.
And as such, the sum of the stories you've been telling about yourself is going to increase. And with that, you're going to have to hold in your mind, in your heart, in your mind, in your head, in your intellect, much more, many more numbers and many more words. But it's fine, because you can do that. That is where I think, to me, storytelling is important. It is how you tell the story. And look, I'll tell you something. A few days ago, or sometime last week, I was working with someone who mentioned something beautifully. And I said beautifully, but I really mean it, because I so disagree with it. But I thought it was beautiful in the way it was shared. And she said, I don't believe and I don't like labels. And then it made me realize that actually I personally like labels a lot. Because labels enable me to do what I understood years ago was useful to do in my life in order to progress and grow. Which is that what gets measured gets managed. And if I'm able to put a label on something, I am now somehow gifted the ability to somehow rate how much of that I am managing. Case in point, as you know, 6 months ago I discovered, diagnosed, whatever, that I have ADHD. I freaking love that label, because now I know what I'm working with. And the negative connotations attached to that are my responsibility. In other words, it's my job to either take on the negative narratives that people may say, because a lot of time is stories that we make up ourselves. And I'm freaking proud of it. I call it a superpower. That's my narration of ADHD. But because I can now manage it, because I know what it is, and I'll proudly wear that label to the point where eventually I'll be able to transcend it. But I know full well that if I want to transcend something, the last thing I want to do is get rid of it.
Yep.
So, yeah, labels, terms, words, we get lost into it. Yeah, this is how we make sense of the world. This is how we make sense of ourselves, by speaking and by changing our minds.
Exactly. And I actually think you're right in that we need to say it out loud. And that does take courage. We have to risk. We have to go like this, blah, 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 and then go, oh, That's not quite how I wanted that to land. Could I say that again? Can I try again? And having the courage to, like you said, let your kids fail. And why don't we all fail more often, but do it as an exercise in creativity, and learn to speak and use that voice, because that's how you learn to think. You can't speak everything at once. So it actually teaches us how to follow something, and then we can realize, oh, that leads to nothing. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt it this way. So storytelling in that sense has always been, I think, in our human history, a way in which we learn and grow and share knowledge and develop and evolve, actually.
Yeah, it's like learning a new language. We've got some bilingual, maybe even trilingual, I don't know, around the table. And I think, there comes a point when you're learning a new language where you really have to let go of the fear of sounding stupid and making mistakes and all of that. And it's when you get to that point and you let go and you just think, well, I'm just going to let whatever wants to come out of my mouth come out of my mouth. And I hope they understand, is when you start to see the shifts.
Yeah.
Because I distinctly remember that in French, where I was still afraid to speak because of how I might sound or what will come out, will they understand, whatever filters I had at the time. I think for me, most of the time was that it was like, it's either too much effort or I don't know if I'm going to really be able to say what I'm trying to say, the understood piece. And then one day I thought, well, it doesn't matter, because they'll just hear what they hear, and then they'll just recognize I'm not the native speaker, and then eventually I'll be better at it. And in that moment of being courageous enough to, mess up, and I know you both understand this, you came in, when you first moved here, you couldn't buy a stamp, so the process of, I just have to just go with it now. I have to surrender to this struggle, this pain, this whatever it felt like, so that I can transcend and get to the other side where the work begins.
Well,
where
actually,
it really, really begins, right?
In mindfulness, so you talk about, worry about, when you're learning French, whether people would think badly of how you spoke or what have you, something like that. That is self-image, and it is actually judging of self as well. And in mindfulness, the non-judgment attitude is a doorway to awareness, actually. And that's often misunderstood, because people think non-judging means that you stop judging, or you will suddenly turn off that discriminating voice.
Which we need.
It's helping. Why it's a doorway is because as we cultivate the awareness of judgment with a view to relinquish judgment, we become more and more aware, and then become more aware of self. And then it becomes easier to relinquish those things about caring what people think about us or whatever. And it's continuous work, continuous work. But actually the other point about the labels, which I find quite interesting, is that, I find it helpful in my mind to construct the relationship between a lot of these concepts in a circular way. One thing leads to the other thing leads to the one thing, and round and round it goes, rather than it such being linear. So actually labels for me are both helpful and unhelpful simultaneously. As you mentioned, you need them to navigate the world, but also they are constraining. So I liken it to a cord on a kite. A kite cannot fly without a cord. It needs a cord. If you remember when we were kids, we used to make kites out of like lollipop
sticks.
Sticks. But you can't fly a kite without a cord. So the very thing that allows the kite to fly is the very thing that keeps it stationary or tethered. And the relationship between the two are similar. So the labels are certainly helpful, and they're also limiting at the same time. And it's just the paradox of life that we live in. The more and more you become aware, the more paradoxes we stumble across. It's like the very thing that's been helpful is also the very thing that's limiting. And then you're just going around in this loop.
But you are talking about limitations as somewhat negative. And I also always see limitations as something as a gift. So from that reason, I cannot help but somehow slightly disagree with what you're saying, because limitations and their negative connotations are just what we make of them.
But I don't actually think here it's a negative thing, because remember, it's what's allowing the kite to fly. Yeah, and that's exactly why I'm saying it is the thing that keeps it here, but it allows it to fly. So your interpretation of that, is entirely how you view the chord. Is it stopping the kite from flying, or is it making it fly?
Yeah.
And I'm saying that it does make it fly. And so they're actually helpful. So these distinctions then just become semantics after a while. Because actually, yes, it's grey, but it's keeping it there too. It's not wholly negative, it's not wholly positive, it's just a thing. That's that's the angle I'm coming from at the chord.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you have the chord and you have the kite, but it still ain't flying without the wind.
There you
True.
go.
So what's the wind?
Presence,
Yeah.
baby.
Presence.
Yeah, I was going to circle this back to being, because
It's
a lot
funny you
of
say that. I'm sorry to cut you say that. It's funny you say that because my first answer in my mind was it's the future. It's not
future.
present. It's the future. It's goals. That's how I rate whether my limitations are useful or not. It is whether they get me any closer to where I want to get to next.
Yeah, but I don't think he meant the present. I think he means presence, as in
What we were saying
what we were
totally,
saying
and that's
in the
sustaining
the
of
scope
awareness.
of, not as in time.
I understand, but presence
Oh,
has
yeah, yeah,
got a
okay.
strong connotation.
Okay, I thought you meant the present as in the moment now.
But it's the same thing.
It
That's
is.
the-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't see it that way, as in time. But yeah, okay.
To be present implies all those things, whether it's semantics, linguistics, it doesn't matter. Presence is strongly rooted in now,
yeah.
It is.
as opposed to then or by
Tomorrow.
then or
Yeah.
tomorrow,
Or yesterday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
which is then.
Yeah.
And so the comparison is always there. There's no
So you feel it's
future,
in
there's
the
no
future.
present.
You feel it's in the future.
The wind is the future, because then it will allow me to assess whether the kite is a good one, whether the string is strong enough, whether I'm actually going somewhere or not, whether there's something to be managed here, whether there's something to be labeled. Otherwise, I'm all over the place and I ain't going anywhere. And that to me is the opposite of freedom. So the ability to rate and to use labels in order to where I want to get to, in order to manage my current present state in relation to what I wish my next one will be, is where it's at.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add
was gonna say,
from
what's the wind?
my wilderness experience, where there's a moment where you can realize you're interconnected with all things in time and space, and the need to have a mental understanding and to create story or label or anything actually dissolves, and then there's a grace that comes in. And I find that state so rejuvenating. I think we need all of it. I think we need time where we're contemplating and considering and following desire in the directionality of its emergence. And I think there's time for review and excavating the old bones and seeing what's there. And then there's time, which we don't do enough of, is just to really feel the aliveness which is happening right here, right now. And actually indulge in that moment of silence and of beingness together. And I think we're afraid of it because when we're in that state, it's profoundly intimate. It's like a lovemaking with life itself. And for a lot of us, that's uncomfortable. And yet, when you experience it, you don't want anything else in that moment. It's incredible. So I just wanted to bring us back to all of it. It's the human messiness, and it's gorgeous. Yeah.
Human messiness.
Up until it's not, yeah.
Exactly. Sweet. Well, I'm just going to wrap up here because I feel like we've made full circle. I feel like full
Had
circle.
some family fun.
Yeah, we've had some family fun, family conversations, and another yummy, I'm sure, two of many more to come. Maybe via Zoom next time when you're somewhere off. But so wonderful to have you in the UK this time. If you have any final words, even if it's just one, that kind of just feels right to say right now. Now is the time.
My favorite words, allow.
Allow.
Yeah. Allow.
It's beautiful. You're good. Silence.
Yeah, I love the expansion. with everything that implies. The scary stuff, the beautiful stuff, the not so beautiful, the ugly side of change that may well lead you into a transformation. Allow that to happen. Here lies the power. The whole paradox of control. It takes a lot of control to let go of control. Here is the real control. So allow things to take place. Allow yourself to make changes, to imply growth, to demand more of yourself and of the world around you, without falling prey to guilt, without falling prey to bullshit, without falling prey to, anything that's not benevolent. And that's not anything that's not aligned with where you want to get to next.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end with love. Thank you all again for your love, your presence, your wisdom, your sharing, your openness. I'm so grateful for this conversation with the lovely Rafan Kebe on my right, Saida Desile and Calvin Niles. This is Family Affair. Can't wait for the next one. Love you all. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with your friends and remember to subscribe. From my heart to yours, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.